So today's webinar is entitled Open Student Work with a Safety Net, Student Knowledge Production and Student Rights in an Open Environment. So we have a really great panel of presenters. They're all from the University of Washington Bothell, Cascadia College Campus Library. And so I'm gonna let them introduce themselves. And I just wanna thank the presenters so much for volunteering to share their knowledge with our community. So without further ado, I'm gonna hand it over.
Thanks, Candace, and thanks for sharing the screen. Laura, can everyone see that okay? Yeses? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Berger. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a research and instruction librarian at the University of Washington Bothell and Cascadia College Campus Library. And I also liaise with science, math, and education. And I would also like to introduce Denise Hattwig, the head of digital scholarship at the campus library. Denise isn't presenting with us today, though she is here. Hey, Denise. And we just wanted to acknowledge that this presentation wouldn't be possible without all of her work. So thank you, Denise. And she may also be answering some questions during Q&A potentially. So thank you.
Okay, and my name is Laura Dimmit Smyth. I also use she, her pronouns, and I'm also a reference and instruction librarian, and I work with fine arts and cultural studies at the campus library.
I am Danielle Rowland, and my pronouns are she, her. I am currently the American and Ethnic Studies librarian at UW Bothell and Cascadia. And I have formerly been the first year experience librarian, although we're sort of restructuring that role, and Penelope Wood is taking over some of those coordinating responsibilities. So I'm just mentioning that for those of you who have known me as an FYE librarian, that is no longer part of my title.
Hi, y'all. My name is Penelope Wood, and I am also a research and instruction librarian at UW Bothell Cascadia College. And my subject areas are gender, women, and sexuality studies, and then also engineering as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the presentation. We are going to be turning off our video while we're presenting if we're not speakers. So we also invite you to do that as well.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and get us started. So thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate you taking the time to discuss open student work with us. So one of the major pieces of work that we'll be sharing with you today is our library's statement on student rights in open environments. So in addition to those of us presenting today, we also wanted to credit our colleagues who contributed to the statement, including Nia Lamb, Myra Waddell, and many other UW Bothell and Cascadia library staff who contributed and reviewed this work. By the end of this presentation, we're hoping that y'all will recognize how open pedagogy can develop student agency and an understanding of themselves as active participants in the knowledge creation process. We want to give you some space to evaluate the opportunities and challenges that arise from open assignments and syllabi, specifically related to privacy and intellectual property. And we also want to give you some time to reflect on your own institutional context and to maybe identify some opportunities for deeper engagement with open pedagogy and think about advocating for student rights in those spaces. Next slide, Laura. Thank you. So first I'm going to give you a little context on our campus. Our library serves both the University of Washington Bothell, a four-year institution, and Cascadia College, a community college. Faculty on both of these campuses have a really strong pedagogical focus. Community-based learning and research is incorporated into classes across the curriculum. And well before we had started a statement on student rights in open environments, faculty on both campuses were utilizing open pedagogy and engaging open student work. So given this institutional context and thinking about our role as library workers, we saw some opportunities. We saw some space to educate faculty and students who might be new to working in open environments. In particular, thinking about helping students make really informed choices about their work in open environments. And we also felt it was really important to advocate for student rights in these spaces and to set up a framework that allows for really meaningful learning experiences in open spaces. And next slide. And before we get into the specifics of the work, we wanted to give y'all some broad definitions about how we're thinking about open pedagogy and open student work. Neither concept has really rigid parameters, which is great. It makes it very flexible. But folks engaging in this work have defined it in ways that work for them and for their students and their campuses. So we've pulled together some resources, they'll be linked at the end, who've written by a variety of educators working in open environments. And we'd encourage you to take a look at all of this work that's being done and see what might work well in your context. But for our purposes, we've outlined some characteristics or some goals that open work generally meets on our campus. So open pedagogy really centers student learning and needs, and it makes them really active collaborators in their education. Emphasizes connections beyond individual classroom spaces and really moves work into more public facing spaces. And as you would expect, it results in open products generally. And open student work encourages student autonomy as creators of information, enables students to engage in public discourse and to contribute their knowledge in these open spaces. And it starts to move away from disposable assignments where the focus, which focus the instructor kind of as the sole audience for those work or products. And with that, I will hand it over to Dani.
So there's a lot of value inherent in open student work. These are some examples of that value. It produces tangible products that students can add to portfolios. They can be used to satisfy degree and graduation requirements at UW Bothell, for instance. They produce products that students can use to seek employment or postgraduate education. And generally, students just carry them with them after graduation into public and work life. I think one of the biggest ones is that open student work gives students experience with the benefits and risks of engaging in public conversations. As Alyssa said, often the only audience for an assignment is the instructor, but these assignments offer an opportunity to participate in public discourse and have a public impact. Students really feel the power of communicating their research and ideas when they get feedback from people around the world. This is actually most often positive. Like, we know students who have had employment and publishing opportunities developed directly from their open student work. But there are some risks as well, as anyone who has ever read a comment section knows. I inherited a class, for instance, that involved Wikipedia editing, and I learned that in the first iteration of the class, feedback to students from other Wikipedia editors was quite harsh and caused some distress. So we incorporated some emotional preparation in future iterations of that class, and it went a lot better. Open student work offers expanded engagement with communities and community organizations. With community-based learning projects that include open student work, students can produce lasting resources that community organizations can use. At Cascadia, for instance, a web design class solicits web design projects from local organizations, and students design a website for a real-life client. In our Feminist Community Archive of Washington, created by UW Bothell students, they have surfaced voices and stories that have been buried and hidden in organizations' records and histories and made them publicly available. Open student work offers students the opportunity to learn technologies and tools that support open digital content and open publishing. That can be as simple as blogs and websites, but it can also include things like Pressbooks and Omeka, Wikipedia, and audio and video editing software. There's a lot to learn. Open student work offers the opportunity to learn new approaches to research, information analysis, and scholarly communication and presentation. That can include, and we've seen it include, things like openly available digital oral history, text mining research, data visualization, exhibit building. It gives students lots of opportunities to gain real life experience that will be useful to them. And with that, I will pass it to Laura for student rights and responsibilities.
Okay, so to provide a little bit of extra context, most of our statement on student rights in open environments frames a set of rights and responsibilities for students who are engaging in this type of work. So to kind of facilitate sharing this with you in the context of this presentation, we've chosen to pair up some of the rights and responsibilities from the statement so that we can talk about how they relate to each other. And you'll be able to find a link to our full statement at the end of the presentation when we share a list of resources with you. So this first pair of right and responsibility is about the choice that students have whether their work even appears in an open context. And the responsibility that goes along with that is for them to understand and really consider the implications of what it means to make something open. Because we know once something is out on the open web, it's hard to truly remove it. So to provide an example, students in certain majors or who want to pursue certain types of careers might want to be really selective about what appears online and is tied to them. They might want to avoid extraneous Google search results, that kind of thing. So maybe a student wants to pursue a highly public career like politics. They may or may not want something that they did in a class once when the class wasn't even tied to their major. They may not want that out when people are looking up, like, who is this person? But also it may just be that a student wants to be very private online, and that might not have anything to do with their future career or their goals. And that has to be really an equally valid choice. It's very important when designing an open student work opportunity to provide an alternative, because you shouldn't be forcing someone to make their work publicly available. Okay. The second set of right and responsibility is about credit and attribution. So when students create work, they should be the owners of the copyright for that work. They should be able to choose how it's attributed to them, whether it's their given or chosen name, or whether they want a pseudonym. And if it makes sense or is appropriate, they should have input on the type of open license that their work is viewable under. And so along with that, they have a responsibility to learn about their choices for licensing and attribution and to be really clear about what their preferences are. So to follow that with an example, students who create artistic works might feel really strongly about either allowing or disallowing derivative works. So like an adaptation or a remix of something. In the fine arts, specifically, it's very important to encourage students to think about themselves, not just as students, but as creators who have a high level of control over what they create and how it's shared, just in the same way that artists that they study and admire have control over their own works. And this could apply to students in non-artistic mediums in a lot of fields, but that's just kind of one example to help you think through attribution and credit. And the final pair of right and responsibility that we have chosen to highlight is the right for students to engage in work that has true educational value. And going along with that, they have a responsibility to be clear about questions, concerns, or things that are confusing to them as they embark on an open student work project. So, for example, having students work on mass digitization of materials is not going to have a lot of tangible educational value. It's very rote. It might further like an existing faculty project, but that doesn't make it appropriate for a credit-bearing class experience. You could certainly hire a student worker and pay them to work on that type of digitization, but that's a very separate that's a very separate thing from something that a student goes into with the express purpose of learning. And it's equally important to think about how projects are scoped in a way that is appropriate for the duration of a quarter or a semester, because these projects can get really big really fast. And if deadlines and time pressures become too much of a factor, any educational value that they have is going to get really depressed by the stress that students are feeling. And that is something that is going to come up again shortly. And now I'm going to hand it off to Penelope, who's going to give a specific example of an open student project that they helped support.
Thanks, Laura. So this is just one really exciting and recent example of open student work that UW Bothell students created in a class that was a 200-level interdisciplinary arts and sciences, gender, women, and sexuality studies class that Dr. Julie Shane created. So this class created a zine. It's called Badass Women in the Pacific Northwest. And it's a collection of biographies and portraits and fusing of multilingual poetry, art, and writing that celebrates and honors some badass women, femmes, and non-binary people in and from the Pacific Northwest. So this zine had collaborative support with librarians teaching in the class alongside Dr. Julie Sheen, and me and Denise Hattwig were the librarians who supported that class. And then there was also a peer facilitator named Nicole Carter. It should be noted that Julie Shane and Denise Hattwig have been really long-term collaborators through their work on the Feminist Community Archive, which, as Danny mentioned, was another open student work project. To support this class, librarians led collaborative instruction sessions and taught concepts around practices related to researching lesser documented histories, and then also concepts and practices related to working openly, including copyright and open content, Creative Commons content, information literacy concepts about student knowledge production and participating in scholarly conversations, and then also student rights and responsibilities that Laura just highlighted some. There was also assignment-specific training with Pressbooks, which was the selected tool, and just want to shout out to Lauren Ray, who is in the audience here as the Open Education Librarian at UW, who did some support with this tool because it was a brand new tool for our library. But Denise Hattwig did have a lot of deep engagement around training around Pressbooks with the students as well. So I just want to make sure that's called out here too, that there was some significant support provided with the technology aspect. So Dr. Shane has a quote that says in a preface to this zine, some students ran with this project as if it was their only commitment in life, while others balanced it with all of their other work, school, and life responsibilities. And then a few students are GWSS majors or minors, but the majority were not. And for many, this was their first GWSS class ever. So scoping a class and the commitment that different students are going to engage in was pretty significant in the class. Some ethical considerations with this, design choices may not always be the most fully accessible. So like red text on a green background is a significant barrier for people who have color blindness. So just keeping that in mind. The next few slides are going to be specific examples related to this zine that are callouts that demonstrate or illustrate the content that build on the content that Laura had just previously presented. So slide, Laura. So this is actually a screenshot of the catalog record. So what's interesting is as a collaborative open student project, the professor's name is listed as the author, and then students who wrote the introduction are listed as authors, but then the contents that were written by students are also included in the record. So students who have chosen to have their name visible or a pseudonym, you can search their name on the internet, and I've done this with a couple of the students listed here, and they actually do surface in a Google search, Badass Women of the Pacific Northwest with their name associated. So if students are interested in having their name discoverable that way or affiliated, it kind of, you know, there are some implications on that. And there's also like some implications around authority or how authority is represented in a library catalog record if folks are interested in metadata and cataloging. That there's some implications around hierarchy here. So we just wanted to call that out. Slide, Laura. And this one is a representation of copied from student work. It's a poem and then a translation alongside, it's in order of length, but a Korean translation by another student. And this one, as an ethical consideration, professors have to be willing to reckon with challenging their own thoughts and beliefs around English only as a hegemonic instruction education space, right? So accepting student work in a language that is not fluent for the instructor as an example of an ethical consideration that professors would need to have. So next slide. This is a copy of, this is a copy of two different pieces of art from the zine. Hazel Wolf's piece has a notation for Creative Commons for a licensing. The student whose last name is Prasad has indicated licensing, and the other student who did Moni Chao's portrait doesn't have that. So that there's distinctions throughout the zine based on students' choices for their licensing. Slide. And then talking about ethical considerations around the technology used to support the class. So while the zine was created using Pressbooks and then also developed through a Google Team Drive, which are university supported tools, non-supported tools that aren't supported by university, like YouTube, really surfaced ideas around digital privacy and ownership of creative works that students would be using that are supported or hosted in a corporate for-profit platform for sharing. So this video about the making of the Badass Women in the Pacific Northwest is an auxiliary project related to the zine, but it is still part of the open student work. So it's part of the assignment creation. So they did a video documentation of it, which is really cool. A few things about this project are the professor actually was able to print out this from the Pressbooks and shared it with Meg Rapino, shared it with the senator, I just blanked on her name, our Washington senator, and a few other accessible and regional living badass women. So that was a really exciting project for students to see their work shared in a physical way with prominent local people that they wrote about and they did creative works on. So it had a lot of impact and was really meaningful for students. Slide. So with all that in mind, some recommendations for faculty that we talked about and developed were for faculty to support students working in open environments. We really advocate that they consider the following recommendations. So actively teach and/or collaborate with librarians to do the teaching on student rights and responsibilities in the courses that involve open student work, and include discussions of advantages and disadvantages of public engagement. Slide. So Also structuring in the course design, structuring syllabi and instructional time so that open student work and related topics like open access and Creative Commons are built into the course and not added on as an afterthought. So designing open scholarship and open pedagogy assignments to include all students in all aspects of the learning experience, regardless of whether or not they choose to make their work openly available. Slide. And then about that choice, the student agency is paramount. So facilitating students explicitly indicating their choices about open work and ideally doing this in an online or print agreement form. And Denise Hattwig has a print student agreement form that is used in all open student work for the digital scholarship work that she does on our campus. So also, faculty should remain neutral about student choices related to open work and separate these student choices from grading rubrics. So as Laura explained, student rights around decisions of pseudonym use or not having work associated or affiliated with them should still be respected, even in a large collective open project. So part of that is engaging with students around questions about open access and open work, and really understanding and engaging the implications of a broader access to their work. So with that, Alyssa's going to take over now and explain our discussion.
Thanks, Penelope. So now that we have shared some of the ways that we're supporting open student work on our campus, we wanted to give you all some space to think about and to share with one another how your campus or you might already be engaging some of this or how you could potentially incorporate some of this into your work. So we're gonna split you into breakout rooms and we'll chat for about, it says 10 minutes on the slide, but I think we actually have time for 15. So we'll give you all about 15 minutes to discuss. We have some discussion questions. You can either follow the URL or I will actually post it in the chat right now. Oh yeah, go ahead.
In a room, per room.
Oh, that's a great question. How many people do we have? 24? Ooh, I'm bad at math.
If you say how many people you want per room, I can just manually change it.
Sure.
You can do 5s and 4s if we have 24 and there's
Sounds
5 of us, right? Is that okay?
Thank you for that quick math, Penelope.
All right. Because we have 5 spaces, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you follow that link, it goes to a Google Doc, and there are 5 different group spaces that all have the same discussion questions. And we just ask, as you're chatting, please go ahead and just take some notes. It can be very casual, just on kind of what you all are sharing. We're not going to have kind of a group share when we get back. We really just want this to be kind of like a generative idea and support space for y'all to discuss. But the Google Doc will be up and accessible, so you can go back and look and see what other groups were chatting about. And then we'll come back together for general Q&A, or if you want to share out what you did service in the groups, that's great too. All right. Okay. All right, I think we have everyone back. Thank you all for taking the time to discuss. We really appreciate it. And I'm really excited to look and see what everyone was chatting about. So now we just have time for Q&A. And I will also share a link to our resources and some of the links that were in the presentation. So you should have that now. So please feel free to keep putting questions in the chat or to just unmute and ask them. But I will start with the first question we got via chat, which was, how do you navigate conversations with students who ask whether their labor should be paid? I don't know who wants to take this one.
I don't really want to take it, but I do want to say that was the main focus of our whole breakout room discussion.
I can start an answer and then somebody else can supplement. But for me, I think this question really gets at why it's so important for open projects and classes that are formulated in this way to be really explicit about the learning goals, because if, you know, I think in a credit class situation, that's a different setup than something like an internship or a job. So I think that something that can help is to be very explicit, like here are the goals, here are the things that you will gain, the skills, the experience, all of those types of things. But if anybody else wants to add to what I said, that would also be great.
I just want to add that in the classes where I've worked with Denise, with Professor Shane, that I don't remember hearing this come up in that. And also there's a lot of investment around social justice conversations and equity and like having meaning and purpose and like, you know, really strong change making work, that it's like, you're doing this as like, you know, toppling the patriarchy, or do you know what I mean? Like there's a really strong values aspect that students come to have as part of the reason that they're committed to doing that work. I don't know if, Denise, you've had conversations where people were talking about compensation in those classes, but.
I think, I don't know if some of you are familiar with UCLA's statement around student work and digital humanities. But something that's slightly different about ours is we're less focused on like the big project and students being involved in that. And we're more focused on kind of the open pedagogy aspect. So if we consider that, you know, in an open pedagogy situation, you know, students are being required to do work for credit. So that's where a couple aspects that we touch on in the statement come into play. One is, you know, student agency and choice over how their work is used. So if students feel that they should be paid to contribute their stuff to an open project, maybe an option is that they don't contribute it, right? So they still have to do the work for their credit, but if they feel like it's something that should be monetized, then they don't have to make it open. So that's kind of a key component there. And then the other one, of course, that's already been discussed is that there needs to be that educational value in the work. So it shouldn't be just scanning and this type of thing.
Okay, and then we also had a question, where'd it go? Oh, can you comment about license stacking? Is that a problem we should worry about on open work?
So I'm not even sure, I'm just gonna start talking because I'm not even sure precisely what license stacking means, but I'm guessing that it refers to something like what happened in the example that Penelope gave, where a student put a license on an image inside a press book that had a different open license.
Yeah, my understanding.
Okay.
Some scenario like that.
And I mean, I think that's why we included that example, was because, oh, this is a very complicated idea, especially to try to communicate to students. And I'm not sure, this is more a question, I guess, for Penelope and Denise. Is that something you even communicated to students about, or did you just sort of let it happen?
Denise, can you field that question? Because the workshops around licensing and the student forums, I guess, would answer that. There's also a related question that says, would love to know how you manage students who change their minds after the fact. So especially if those served as a basis for other work within the collection. So do you have a process in place? And sorry, I'm unable to stick around, they had to go. So hopefully we can get back to them with the chat. But Denise, can you fill those? Do you mind?
Sure, yeah. So let me see. So for the zine project, the class chose, actually we chose the Creative Commons license with the instructor. And then we taught that process and the meaning of the license to students, and they made their decisions based on that. So that was for the whole zine. Now there was some thinking and feeling that potentially art might need to have a different type of license, because you know, an artwork can often be taken out of context and repurposed, and you know, like some of those images I believe actually do come up independently in Google image searches. So when that's the case, you know, it's important to put a specific license on the individual images as well. So I don't think that there's any variation in that particular work with different licenses, but it's easy enough to do. You know, if the overall work has one Creative Commons license, then you know, individual works of art or something else could have a different license. So and then with drawing student work, of course, you know, once it's out there, it's out there. So that's critical to emphasize with students. But also whenever students do ask us to take something down from a library's hosted platform, we do that. You know, we do it as soon as we can possibly get to it, because obviously, you know, it's about their agency and it's their work. So, you know, we of course honor that request.
Awesome, thank you. Another question that came in was around work that's happening in other classes that might not be using open pedagogy so much, like more traditional things like undergraduate, graduate theses, other capstones that are sort of required to be shared, or like blog posts where there's no alternative assignment necessarily. And I'm not sure if the question is what to do in those situations, or Ben, I don't know if you want to clarify if you had a particular sticking point with that, or.
I guess there was a discussion that I think Penelope brought it up when they were speaking about that we need to provide alternatives. And I'm wondering if that's in every case, or if there are some exceptions, for example, like theses or electives where the entire course may be based around a requirement to publish.
I can start with this, speaking as somebody who was in a graduate program where I had to deposit a thesis that contained creative work. So in that case, I deposited my thesis, but I was also able to embargo it. And so I think that's one strategy, because there are some types of work where it's really important that for a publisher it not be already out, even if out means on an institutional repository that isn't going to get a ton of web traffic, right? So I think that there are ways to both kind of preserve the work to like fulfill that graduation requirement, but also let students control how available it is. Can you just see the abstract? Can you see all the content? That kind of thing.
And I think that also speaks to the idea of using corporate profit-based platforms for hosting student works, right? So that falls into the faculty really need education around that as an idea of what platforms that they're choosing to do. So choosing to use for their suggested platforms for students, and students also understanding that they have agency in those choices as well. So
I just kind of add something to that, actually, because I think my experience with that in talking to faculty has been, you know, when they come to the library, they often tend to just think like, oh, librarians will just help us, right? But what often happens is that we surface a lot of questions that they have not even considered at all, and quickly become overwhelmed. And I think faculty often haven't considered a lot of these questions ahead of time before planning that kind of activity, and anything that we can do to help them prepare, like resources that we can provide to say, here's a checklist of things that you should consider, that kind of thing has been super helpful. That's what I'm so grateful to Denise for in this process.
I'll also just add something that came up really briefly in our breakout room that was really interesting to me. I think particularly with Ben's example of like a class where they have to write a blog post or something, is that we've talked about like a lot of faculty have been doing assignments that qualify as open for a very long time, and they might just not be using that language. They might not be using the frameworks that we associate with that, but they're still doing that work. So I think it's a really great place for us to kind of slide in and be like, here are some frameworks in place that can help maybe make this work more meaningful, or that just might support you in that work and then be really beneficial for students as well. So I think that is important to keep in mind too, as we often have like specific library language that faculty just like aren't using all of the time. So we have like 2 minutes left. Are there any other final questions?
Okay, so I will close this out. I just wanted to again thank all of the presenters for sharing, and thank all of you who attended as well. I know everyone's incredibly busy right now and stressed, and so I'm just really happy that everyone is still engaged and excited about this work. So I want to encourage everyone to continue to have these conversations online and in your institutions. And if anyone here is interested in presenting in the future or starting like a panel conversation, please contact us at ACRL-Oregon. We can help facilitate that. And we'll be sending out an email soon with a link to the recording once that's uploaded, as well as an evaluation form and any links or documents that presenters would like to share with you all. So again, thank you for coming, and have a wonderful rest of your day.